This event is hosted by the Arrowhead Center at New Mexico State University, Technology Hub in Ciudad Juarez, the Medical Center of the Americas Foundation in El Paso, and Pioneers 21 also in El Paso. And on behalf of the leaders of these four organizations, of Kathy Hansen, Ricardo Mora, Emma Schwartz, y un servidor, it is really a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation. I'm Carlos Martinez Vela, and I am the Executive Director of Pioneers 21, and I will be moderating this conversation with great assistance from the technical team at New Mexico State University, as this is a collaborative effort. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. After this introduction, if each of our panelists is going to give their remarks in sequence, at the end, after the three of them speak, there will be 20 minutes for Q&A. You can send your questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A feature that you will find at the bottom of your Zoom window. And today, we're coming together. When this got started 2 weeks ago with the first conversation, we're coming together because we recognize that in this time of crisis, we need to preserve and to continue to build the collaborative spirit that has characterized the Borderplex and our three cities, El Paso, Juarez, and Las Cruces, during this time. That it is a natural instinct to retreat to each of our corners, and we cannot do that, and we need to actually continue building our collaborative spirit as we work in particular for the recovery of our economies, our small businesses, industries, urban economies, and the regional economy as a whole. And this collaboration really needs to happen between government, business, higher education, and civil society as a whole. And that is what's bringing us together. So in each of these conversations, we make an effort to have a panelist from each of these regions, of each of our cities, by the way, or our states, and that represent a cross-section of government, business, higher education, and civil society. We are seeing one example right now of this spirit of collaboration in the public health partnership that has been recently launched by MCA. It's a great example of how this is catalyzing new alliances. So today, we're honored and a pleasure to welcome three panelists representing, again, these three cities in the Borderplex. Representando al estado de Chihuahua and representing the state of Chihuahua, we have Secretary Alejandra de la Vega, who's the Secretary of Innovation and Economic Development in the state of Chihuahua. Nos acompaña la Secretaria Alejandra de la Vega, representando a la Secretaría de Innovación y Desarrollo Económico de Chihuahua. From the business sector, we have Rick Francis, who's the Chairman and CEO of WestStar Bank, and also the chair appointed by Mayor DiMargo of the El Paso Economic Recovery Task Force. And I will mention that communities like ours are very lucky to have community banks like WestStar Bank that are committed to the communities, that we know the role that WestStar Bank has played in supporting businesses in this crisis and in channeling federal support for our businesses. So thank you for that. And from New Mexico, we're joined Marco Grajeda, who's the head of the New Mexico Border Authority. So with these perspectives, we're hoping to have a very rich conversation, and in different ways, from each of their particular perspectives, we've asked them to touch on a number of issues, which will they choose according to what is most relevant to them, how the entities and organizations they represent have responded to the crisis, both internally and towards the community, how the competitive position of our region is changing in good and bad ways, what are the opportunities that we have, the pathways to recovery, and also to share a vision of lasting and practical lessons that we might draw from this moment that we can carry on after the crisis, and how do we emerge of this more united and not more divided. And with that, I would like to first welcome Secretary Alejandra de la Vega from the state of Chihuahua.
Hi, good afternoon to all. From the state government, we have been working under direct leadership of Governor Corral, who has dedicated all of the structure of the administration to orchestrate a comprehensive action plan That includes, of course, as the main issue, the health, but also economic, labor, food security, resilience, and a social safety net under which we've done a major restructure of the state budget. So far, we put together a plan of over 3 billion pesos to support companies, the workforce, and the citizens of Chihuahua. From fiscal facilitation measures for bigger companies to zero-interest loans for SMEs and welfare assistance for vulnerable groups, even those who are not a part of the informal economy. And this is a very important part of the plan, because it is these people in the informal economy that, if we do not provide a safety net, are the ones that in the easier manner can start committing robberies or crimes to get food or to get subsistence for their families. Paired together with specific programs geared towards particular industries such as tourism and retail, we've managed to cover virtually all sectors of the economic landscape of our state. We have been prioritizing the most vulnerable groups. That this has always been the guiding principle of our administration, and the collection of all these programs is no exception. While we are very careful and understand that the motor of our economy is the export manufacturing industry, we have focused on creating programs for SMEs, which we consider to be the backbone of a healthy and diversified economy. Of course, we have had several challenges, the main one being that the state has a limited budget. In Mexico, most of the taxes, including the sales tax or IVA, we have a value-added tax, go to the federal government. But the resources we have restructured to commit them to helping businesses survive and to assure that everybody has food on the table for these difficult months. We have canceled and restructured our priorities, and one of our priorities was restructuring and reducing the large state debt that we inherited, but that has had to take a back seat so that we can confront this emergency. Another of our big challenges is the lack of integration within the USMCA of what to do in an emergency like this, and this has created many difficulties because there is a lack of alignment in what are considered as essential sectors between our two countries. And this creates a disruption in the global supply chain. So this is something that we definitely need to address and try to implement within the USMCA. The scope of the programs that we have implemented arose from meetings and from recommendations from all of the business community, social groups, including the business chambers, think tanks, academia, unions, political parties, as well as a municipal and federal level. There is no shortage of ideas and goodwill among the people inside all these organizations, and this common goal has helped us to galvanize and create a single resolve how to come on top of this. The vision between these different chambers has not always been identical, but all the groups in the region have managed to cooperate on an unprecedented level, and we feel that we will come out of this as one of the strongest regions in the world to face the economic downturn. The world after COVID-19 will be a challenging one. We anticipate a major restructuring of global supply chains under very trying conditions. We have always been one of the most competitive manufacturing corridors on the planet, and we'll need to leverage all the know-how, infrastructure, an institutional ecosystem in order to remain competitive. These challenges come with its own set of opportunities, and we will be there from day one of the recovery, ready to take our place among the most complex, talent-driven, productive platforms in the world. While the challenges are great, we are ready to face a reconstruction phase of this crisis on better terms than most regions of the world, thanks to a quick, strong, and comprehensive response from the very earliest phases of this crisis. We have put together a committee for the economic recovery plan on which we are working together with the private sector. A plan that gives us an opportunity to modernize and become more efficient. We have been forced to become leaner and faster, and this is something most governments struggle to do. We have learned to act and implement new policies and programs at a pace we didn't think possible. We are looking at a modern, adaptable, resilient, and data-driven society that will rely on technology and cooperation with the private sector to adapt to a changing world. Nobody is entirely sure of what the new world will be, but we can be sure we have the tools to adapt to it sooner than anyone and become a major force in the new normal. Decision-making must be centered on public-private collaboration. While there's plenty of experience on the development of specific initiatives, a government that doesn't implement mechanisms to ensure its own decision-making processes, take into account the economy and society at large, is doomed to fall behind the rest of the world. We have always been pioneers on manufacturing, on international partnerships, and on quality. And this DNA must permeate every single organization within our scope. Cooperation with the private sector is the greatest asset we can place at the center of our strategy to make sure we achieve those goals of modernization and efficiency. I think that the interdependence among different regions of our world and on both sides of the border have become more evident than ever. Not only our economies, but societies and the very wellness of both Mexico and the US have grown together, not in spite, but because we have each other. We have become something far greater than neighbors. We are partners that depend and support each other, and in doing so, we have become stronger. This is a chance to ensure this partnership is nurtured and protected. We have recognized that decisions taken on either side of the border have great effects on all of our countries, and we must work to ensure a mutual understanding and cooperation that both respect the sovereignty of both nations, but also ensure the well-being of our countries. That leadership can come from this very table, and our countries will be better off for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary de la Vega. Certainly challenging times, as you were describing, some of the changing in priorities that you came in with a very challenging fiscal picture when Governor Corral took office and you came in, and now the emergency, but on the other hand, the positive notes about us working together and what is happening in terms of not losing that spirit. And just as a reminder, everyone can submit your questions using the Q&A as a feature in your the bottom of your Zoom window. And with that, I would like to now hand over the microphone, whatever that means these days, to Rick Francis, the Chairman and CEO of WestStar Bank, and also Chair of the El Paso Economic Recovery Task Force.
Carlos, thank you. So today we have two crises in our Borderplex region, in our two countries and across the world. The first is a healthcare crisis, and it is impacting us in ways we've never seen. And we celebrate our first responders and those healthcare people and workers and doctors, and that have kind of thrust themselves onto the front line at great danger to themselves in an environment where we had very limited PPE, and it overwhelmed, especially in our epicenters of New York and LA and New Orleans even, overwhelmed the healthcare system. Our officials, really starting with our president, and then I also serve on the governor's strike force for Texas. They began gathering a group of individuals from around our communities on the governor's level and on the mayor, Mayor Margot and County Judge Samiego. They gathered some of the top healthcare professionals, and they literally meet once or twice a day, monitoring the data that's coming in. And the data initially was it was difficult to read because testing was so limited, and the tests were being processed in batches, so it was hard to really tell from day to day because a lab would process 3 days worth of tests in one day, and it would look like you had a spike, but in reality they were testing 3 days worth. But fundamentally they're trying to get a grasp both on the national level, state, and here in our Borderplex region, what is the data looking like in terms of, are we able to flatten the curve so that we can not overwhelm our healthcare system? With that said, resulting from the shelter in place and the literal lockdown of our society as we try and limit the spread of this disease that we're trying to understand how it spreads and its implications, as we went through this lockdown, we created a financial crisis. And that crisis, as opposed to the 12 years ago with the Great Recession that started up at the top at Wall Street and then filtered down, this one started on Main Street. It started with people being laid off as companies were forced to close. And today, we have 30 million Americans that are out of work, almost 20% of our workforce. And to give some context, during this recession of 9, 10, and 11, that number peaked at about 10, 11%. So almost double the number of people are out of work right now. And we're seeing the bread lines that we saw in the 1920 depression. We're seeing those with cars today like we've never seen. Hundreds of cars lined up at our food banks attempting to get food because they don't have a paycheck. And so this crisis is something that our bank takes very, very seriously. Our governor takes very seriously, and our mayor and county judge. And so they, in addition to their healthcare professionals that they meet with, they formed an economic task force so they could address this second crisis that is looking so grim for the average American. And I can tell you there are weekly meetings, and so our listeners are able to kind of understand. It begins with the governor. He is the ultimate authority, and he can put out a set of initiatives and guidelines, and they must be followed. Second is the county judge. Third is the mayor in terms of the order. Fortunately for our community, our county judge and our mayor communicate a lot. They get along well, and they've been able to interpret the governor's orders and add some local guidelines unique to our community, and they're listening to the business leadership who are giving them specific advice about their various businesses or industries that they're in and the unique challenges they might have, so that we can look at that advice and make sure that our community is prepared. And again, it is, we want to come out of this based on data. First and foremost, the safety and health and well-being of our citizens, that trumps everything. But once we understand that data and we see the trends, we must begin to get our community open. We must get people back to work, or this crisis could begin to look and feel like the Great Depression, not the Great Recession. And so and we can't let fear drive decisions. And sometimes things are being driven by the fear of the unknown. So again, I'm a proponent that we are seeing data today, and I get the data every morning. We're seeing data today that we are flattening the curve, and we will get spikes every time there's a holiday. There'll be another little spike after Mother's Day. But fundamentally, we're beginning the process today of opening up our community. I was proud, again, at WestStar, we mobilized our bankers and staff so that we could make sure that El Paso got the maximum amount of money we could get from our federal government in assistance to deliver that money as fast as possible to these small businesses who were out of business, had no revenue coming in, had laid off their employees, because we want to make sure those layoffs are temporary, not permanent, and that these lives are not completely disrupted. At the same time, you had a whole group of people that needed medical care that because we put off elective surgeries and non-essential surgeries, we saw our hospitals having to lay off. I mean, in a healthcare crisis, hospitals are having to lay off a third of their staff because they're not able to have those procedures, cancer patients, and those elective surgeries that are probably pretty critical to the people that need them, but were deemed non-critical as we waited to see if we'd have a wave. But it is so important that we get those people and let that other, what amounts to 75% of the people, make sure they can get some medical care during this period of time in a safe manner. So there will be continue both on the local level, the state level. I can promise you a lot of very bright people are very focused on making sure that our citizens are safe and that our healthcare system is operating in a manner that can handle the people that truly need them, but at the same time kind of help get our economy moving again so we have a recession, not a depression. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Rick. Again, highlighting the complexities of this crisis, right? That starts and is fundamentally a health crisis, but then all the economic disruption that it has created, and how do we manage that complexity? I think it's part of the challenge that this kind of collaboration across regions is happening, and hopefully, as you mentioned, that all of these layoffs are going to be temporary and we can recover. Now the third. Our third speaker is Marco Grajeda. He is the head of the New Mexico Border Authority, an incredibly important perspective to have, right? We just heard from the state of Chihuahua, we just heard the perspective from Texas, and now that incredibly important aspect of our lives, which is the border, the management of the border, which, as we know, has been the flows, the cross-border flows have been impacted in multiple ways in this crisis. So with that, Marco, if you want to offer your perspective here.
Great. Good morning, Carlos. Buenos días a todos. I apologize in advance if you might hear my daughter in the background. That's one of the highlights of having to work from home, is having your kids pop up in the background. So I apologize in advance. Yeah, I'm Marco Grajeda, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Border Authority. The Border Authority is an executive branch state agency based in Santa Teresa that promotes economic development opportunities around and tied to all of our state's international ports of entry and border crossings. Again, thank you for inviting me to participate in this round of regional community conversations. At the Border Authority, like other agencies, we have taken measures that we would never have anticipated and are having to manage and endure significant adjustments as we provide public services. Border businesses, as been discussed, many of them in New Mexico, many of them considered essential, have also had to adjust to keep their workers safe while continuing their operations. But before I discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and what impact it's had on our agency in the region, I thought I would provide a little bit of background on who we are, since I'm sure most folks aren't familiar with the Border Authority. The Border Authority was created to support the development of New Mexico's border-related economy. The role of the Border Authority includes actively promoting and assisting public and private infrastructure development to attract new industries and businesses, and create job opportunities in the border region while also resolving transportation and logistical problems. In short, we're mandated to provide leadership, assistance, and advocacy for border-related development. At the Border Authority, we have a small group of dedicated fronterizos like myself who take pride in increasing ties with Mexico and finding ways to expand our state's trade with our southern neighbor. To give you some brief examples of the work that we're doing at the Border Authority, we've led an effort with the Santa Teresa Port of Entry to expand commercial crossings through the Doña County International Crossing. This would allow commercial cargo, including fuel, airbags, medical supplies, to cross through the state. Currently, this cargo can only cross through the Isleta Port of Entry in El Paso, which is great, but this would create a reliever port in the region and encourage more businesses, to settle in the state. The agency is also gearing up to begin construction of a berm west of the Columbus Port of Entry that will protect against regular flooding and make land available for commercial development. Lastly, I'll mention that we're preparing to design work on a major road that would create a direct route between the city of Sunland Park and Santa Teresa Port of Entry. And we're also leading efforts to expand and modernize the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. But now on to why you all are here. I've been asked to talk about the Santa Teresa region, the state's industrial hub on the border, how the current pandemic has affected the region, and any opportunities for collaboration emerging from this crisis. On the bright side, the Santa Teresa region has continued to operate largely without change during the crisis, and that's because many of the businesses were considered essential. Unlike the rest of the state that saw many business closures, only a couple of businesses had to furlough employees or reduce their hours, and these businesses were affected by the closure of auto manufacturing companies in Mexico. The port also continues to see large numbers of truck crossings. Commercial crossings through the Santa Teresa Port of Entry actually increased during the month of March, when the state had already largely shut down. This year, the port reported over 11,000 trucks compared to just over 9,000 last year. This is great news, and we want to keep that going, and this is thanks in large part to our partners in CBP. The Santa Teresa Port of Entry actually ranks 5th overall in trade among ports along the U.S.-Mexico border, and for comparison, the other 4 ports are either large or mega ports. And a little plug here, I do want to say that even though we have so many commercial vehicles crossing through our port, we still have 0 to 15-minute wait time many hours during the day. So any business owners that need to get commercial goods across should explore the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. Now, our export numbers to Mexico also remain strong despite the pandemic. In March of this year, the state's exports topped 2019 and 2018, according to our partners at the International Business Accelerator, while exports from the state to China in March actually dropped by 50% compared to 2018. I will point out that the state led the nation in export growth to Mexico, thanks in large part to the work of companies in Santa Teresa. So we want to keep that activity going. That's why it was so essential that Santa Teresa continue to operate during the pandemic. On the downside, we have seen declines, pretty significant declines in privately owned vehicle traffic going through the area. But that's expected because of the federal emergency order limiting non-essential travel of Mexicans to the U.S. The other issue we've noticed is a recent dip in commercial vehicles at the Santa Teresa Port of Entry since Mexico began shutting down non-essential businesses, including many maquiladoras in Ciudad Juarez and Chihuahua. Now, hopefully that number will pick up now that Mexico is looking at reopening certain industries, including auto manufacturing companies. Now, again, the good news, Santa Teresa has remained open, but the pandemic hasn't, while it hasn't impacted the Santa Teresa Industrial Park, it has affected Border Authority's operation. Like other state agencies, we have been working from home since mid-March. As I mentioned, it's not easy when you have small children. We have focused more of our attention to helping businesses understand how the regional emergency orders impact their operation, and to helping businesses across the state who have had to close due to the pandemic. To provide some examples, we partner with the International Business Accelerator and the Border Industrial Association to host a virtual town hall for border businesses to get answers on assistance available at the state and federal level. We had folks from Chihuahua and El Paso also joining that conversation. We also partnered with the New Mexico Economic Development Department to host a webinar for Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs. That's one of the highlights of our agency, that all of our staff is fully bilingual. And a note here, if any New Mexico companies are listening, I encourage you to visit the New Mexico Economic Development website, gonm.biz, and register to receive email updates. We expect more state grant programs to come online in the near future, and that's how you can get that information. The Border Authority is also taking part in the development of state and local plans to reopen the economy safely. On the downside, our agency has been impacted financially, as you know, I'm sure many other folks have, since the state reverted money for infrastructure projects due to the pandemic. And like other state agencies, we'll also likely see a reduction in our budget due to the economic hit to New Mexico's economy caused by the emergency orders and a crash in oil prices. I will add that the governor and state leadership are facing difficult choices ahead as they seek to overcome the state's current economic challenges, and the Border Authority and the border region as a whole will continue to do our part to benefit all New Mexicans. Now, as it relates to collaboration and innovation, we have seen a great deal of collaboration at the border on both sides, trying to keep our essential trade moving. Private industry, federal, state officials, and many others have worked to make sure essential cargo continues to pass through our ports and continues to pass safely. That's key. And make sure that businesses have the information they need. I do think it would be helpful to work as a region to develop strategies to reopen our economies. After all, this virus does not respect borders. In terms of innovation, where academia can help is in the development of plans and equipment to keep us safe as we reopen the economy and as we look at remaining competitive as a region, as Secretary de la Vega mentioned as well. With that, I'll close by saying the border economy has always required resilience and resourcefulness and the ability to roll with the punches, and I'm confident we will rise to the occasion and prevail over the effects of these unusual times. And a big thank you also to the essential workers who continue to go to work every day so the rest of us can work from home and we can prevent the continued spread of COVID-19. We should all be grateful to the emergency responders, truck drivers, daycare workers, grocery store employees, farm laborers, and many others who are truly making it possible for our nation and our state to recover. Thank you again for the invitation, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you for that final note. I think it's important for all of us to keep that in mind. If our communities, societies, economies, businesses are keeping going, is because of people who have a certain kind of job, who cannot stay at home, might not have a choice, and who are there, right? So thank you for that, and thank you for your remarks and reminding us about the relevance of collaboration. So, I'm going to build, there are a few questions here related to the reopening, and I'm going to build on something that you said, Marco, related to it will be good to collaborate and to work together as a region in the reopening process, right? It's moving in different parts of the country, even within our region, is a microcosm of the different speeds and policies and approaches that exist to this reopening. So, if you could, perhaps Secretary de la Vega, Rick, and Marco too, if you could, just offer a few thoughts on this issue of how to coordinate the reopening in a way that, as Rick said, takes into account the facts, right? The public health facts, in addition to the economic needs of the community. What are your thoughts? Perhaps we can start with you, Secretary de la Vega, on how is Juarez, Chihuahua moving towards this process of opening?
Well, I think it's a great question because we seem to be out of sync by a couple of weeks. In the state of Chihuahua, the specialists have projected that we will be reaching the peak around the 12th, 14th of May. And so that is creating a lot of tension, especially in the export manufacturing companies, because of the lack of alignment, as I stated, of essential sectors. The automotive industry starting again in the US. As everybody knows, in the state of Chihuahua, we have many companies that manufacture parts for this industry. Close to 60% of the industry in Juarez is related to the automotive sector. And so it is disrupting the supply chain. But also we have to be mindful of the flow of people between our two cities of Juarez and Paso. And we are, I think, better coordinated on the economic recovery plans. I am participating in the Mayor Margot's committee, but I think we need to do a better job of connecting the health officials, so that's really where it all starts. We need to, as Mr. Francis said, we need to drive decisions by data, because first and foremost, we need to protect our citizens. And when we feel that we can safely begin to reopen certain sectors, do so. We are working on a plan so that when these dates approach, we are ready to start opening up the different sectors in the economy in Chihuahua. But we are also taking into account that this will have to be gradual. We have over 300,000 people that work in the export manufacturing companies in Juarez, of around which 30%, a little less than 30%, 29%, are still working because they are considered essential. And so it seems unlikely we can't day one bring back the 70%. So that's part of the plan that we are working on.
Thank you, Secretary de la Vega. I don't know if Mr. Francis, do you have any thoughts on this question of, as your involvement in economic recovery and the reopening at the state level, or coordination between our region?
Certainly, I think, Carlos, I think that Secretary de la Vega highlighted some of the challenges in the communication on the healthcare side. Certainly, we see the United States beginning to have a position of opening up the economy, in some cases faster than some people are comfortable with. And I do get the data and sit in on some of the calls, and our healthcare officials are, they literally have a meeting every morning, and that includes people from Juarez, New Mexico, and Texas, where they keep each other, the major hospital systems and our government healthcare officials keep each other in the loop as to what's going on in their communities. There, as Secretary de la Vega said, there is a timing difference, not only in the rollout of PPE and testing, which is taking place faster in the United States than it is in Mexico, and so sometimes it's the data available from the different communities is not as robust as we would hope. And so I think they're trying to do the best they can in terms of, with the data they have, recognizing the holes in the data we have, to try and craft a way for us to keep people safe, but at the same time open up our economies. I certainly, on WestStar's part of the PPP loans that we made were probably 9% or so were in New Mexico with our New Mexico customers, and we did process a number of loans for the U.S. subsidiaries of companies based in Juarez or in Chihuahua. So we are very committed to making sure we can reopen safely, but as rapidly as possible, recognizing that I think Secretary de la Vega pointed out, before this COVID-19 crisis started, we saw a change taking place in the global supply chain of companies transitioning part of their supply chain away from China into Mexico as their preferred partner. And quite frankly, we believe that will accelerate after COVID-19. We get our hands around that, where Mexico will be probably one of the biggest benefactors and El Paso, because of our connection with them, the realignment of the supply chain.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Francis, for those remarks. And that's a good segue, what you mentioned about the realignment of the supply chain, and also you mentioned the Secretary de la Vega. To consolidate a few questions that have come in related to this issue, right? As we emerge from the crisis, we know we are, the fourth largest manufacturing hub in North America, global supply chains, and there is this phenomenon that we had already started to observe, which is the reshoring of some manufacturing operations from China and elsewhere, and the development of the expansion of local suppliers. So one question, I think, for all of you, and maybe again, Secretary de la Vega, if I may ask you to be the first to address, which is, what can we do, or what are we doing to make sure that we emerge as a more competitive manufacturing region, and with stronger, perhaps more localized supply chains? And coupled to that, and given to the role that the four organizations co-hosting this webinar play, what are opportunities to diversify the economy, right? There are questions here, and all of you touched on these, related to entrepreneurship, to technology, to small businesses. So two components to this. One is keeping and increasing our competitiveness versus regions like China in manufacturing, while we also diversify the economy.
Okay, well, and I think that's how we should address it. It's two different parts of our plan. The first one is related to maintaining our competitiveness. We need to be sure to address all the issues that the companies that are now invested in our regions feel confident that they have enough information, that we maintain that relationship with them, that we keep those jobs that we now have. We have a very interesting industrial sector in our region, and we need to be sure to not lose any of those jobs while we are prioritizing the health of our citizens. So it is a very delicate balance that we need to maintain of people's health while maintaining those job opportunities for the people of our region. And I think with the challenges that we are now seeing in the world economy, there will be a lot of opportunities, but they will not come easily, because we will not be the only ones fighting to grab those opportunities. We see a world recession now, and so many different regions will be fighting to get those jobs, to be a player of this new normal, no? What has become to be called as a low-touch economy. It seems we will not go back to the normal we used to know, and we need to be ready. One of the very important aspects is being able to digitalize many parts of our economy, especially helping SMEs digitalize their business, to be able to reach a new audience, to be able to work through digital platforms, because the retail world, as we know, will change at a more accelerated pace. And we need to also be able to generate the talent that can take us there to this new knowledge economy. I think we were already seeing these concepts, but this pandemic will accelerate are the disruption that all the technology will cause in our economy. And we need to be ready with the talent. We need to be ready with the ecosystem and creating the companies with innovation. We are investing in several infrastructures throughout the state. In Juarez specifically, in June, we'll be finished with the construction of an artificial intelligence center. And we are also in the process of building an innovation and a technology integration center, CITA, that will be led by the Instituto Politécnico Nacional, which I think will be a great platform for the industry that we now have to be able to attract more sophisticated, complex jobs, processes that have better paying jobs of those same companies.
I don't know if Mr. Grajeda or Mr. Francis want to offer any remarks about this question, or we move to the same question. Thank you, Secretary de la Vega.
I'll just say that it's important to highlight, it's important to work with our private industry to identify those opportunities. Here at New Mexico, we have great collaboration with our private industry, including the Border Industrial Association, that really helps us to determine what are the areas or opportunities that exist. My role as the New Mexico Border Authority is to make sure that the infrastructure is there to help those companies succeed, both the ones that are there and the ones that we could attract. As I discussed, investments at our ports of entry is important. But for now, we need to make sure that our workers are safe and that we're ready to reopen.
Thank you.
Carlos, I'd like to highlight that leading up to this crisis, certainly El Paso has thrown up some of the best economic numbers in 50 years. And that, from my perspective, has been because of the collaboration that has taken place between our three states, between the Borderplex Alliance and again, the Border Industrial Association, Económico Desarrollo, as these groups have come together, your own Pioneer 21, and we're able to go out with a unified voice and have discussions with companies that are looking, and we have the unique opportunity, in many cases, the tax structure, where Texas has a low income tax but a high personal property tax. New Mexico is kind of the opposite. So depending on the type of industry, we can place them either in New Mexico or here. Again, high labor content, Juarez is ideal. And so we have a kind of a triple threat here that has allowed us to attract companies faster than in any time in our history. And that will continue once the crisis is over. And so we've planted some good seeds. And again, Santa Teresa is absolutely one of the fastest growing areas in New Mexico. And it's that partnership between Chihuahua, Texas, and New Mexico that is allowing this to happen. And so a lot of very good things are taking place leading up to this. And my expectation is a lot of good things will happen as the new normal, as Secretary de la Vega said, as we power out of that.
Thank you. Thank you, the three of you. There is for these perspectives, there is we've been talking about the role of these entities of businesses, but there is a really interesting question here, which is two related questions. One is, what is the role that each of us, right, as individuals, can play in this process of reopening and recovery, and how do we ensure broad participation from the community in this process, from entities or individuals who might not be well represented right now in the conversations, in the different collaborative efforts across the region. So, well, what is our role as individuals, and how do we bring in as many? How can we be as inclusive as possible in this process? I don't know who wants to start with that.
Well, I will start out by saying fundamentally it becomes communication. And from there, we have a responsibility to make sure that there is representation on the different groups that are having dialogues from all the different stakeholders within our communities, so that decisions aren't made that exclude people. And again, back to making decisions based on data, not on fear.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Marco, any thoughts?
Well, I'd say, you know, this platform is really good in terms of including, you know, a wide array of people that are usually or oftentimes left out. You know, I think these ideas that are very innovative and get information out to, you know, all our communities, I think that's great. And you know, we'll gladly play a role in helping you out. Certainly, as we look to recover, I think we all play an important role in following the guidelines and you know, using all the safety measures that we can to make sure that we recover quickly as a region.
Thank you. Secretary de la Vega, any thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with Marco. I mean, the new platforms where, I shouldn't say new, they're not new, but most of us, we're still using, you know, face-to-face meeting, and we've come to be on these platforms all day. The way we work has drastically changed. And I think that provides a much broader opportunity to be inclusive. And yes, we need to commit to always being open to include people that want to participate. The big challenge is getting everybody on the table. But I think that is the only way we will come up with solutions for the whole region, by working together.
Very good, thank you. And one final question, and I appreciate we have had about, you know, up to 150 members of our three cities attending this conversation. Thank you all for attending. You got some great questions. As you know, when this is a live conversation, we have limited opportunities to answer questions. Sometimes in these chat features, it's easy to get 50 questions, right? We still have to prioritize and do, and myself as a moderator, I take responsibility for doing the best and interpreting the questions the best possible. So I apologize if I wasn't able to address a few of your questions, more than a few. The last question, I think important, if you can, the three of you can share your thoughts on what do you think as we move ahead is the greatest opportunity for partnership or collaboration between our regions for a more prosperous future across our binational three-state area. Whoever wants to start, please do.
Well, I'll start, and I think the biggest opportunity is working together. We went on a promotion trip to Taiwan. The Secretary for Economic Development of New Mexico, Alicia Keys, and myself led this trip together, not only the two state governments, but I invited like 12 people from the business community went on that trip. And you could see the response of the business community in Taiwan by seeing the two countries, the two states together, facilitated their decision-making greatly, because they're very interested in the US market, and Mexico becomes a strategic partner. And by seeing us together, it gives them a sense of confidence that things will flow, and that sometimes we see the border as if it was on the other side of a border was a black hole. And it isn't. We've been integrated for many, many decades. The first maquiladora in Mexico started in Juarez 55 years ago, RCA. We still have the second one, Electrocomponentes, or ECI, is a big company in the state of Chihuahua. They have 10 plants. They were the second one, and now they have 10 plants. But working together, making those trips together, the response was very positive. We immediately got a visit back from a group of Taiwanese businessmen that were in Santa Teresa. We then hosted them in Juarez. We had another trip scheduled for early May, which was of course postponed. But there have been a lot of initiatives coming out of that, and so I think we need to do that more often and integrate the efforts. The Borderplex Alliance has been doing that for a couple of years now, and I think we should support those efforts that talk about the region, the Borderplex, not only of our cities, because I've always thought that the biggest asset Juarez has is El Paso, Santa Teresa, and El Paso's biggest asset is Juarez. And there are things that we are not competition, because the things that make sense to manufacture or transport, or all the different parts of the supply chain, some things make more sense to do on the Mexican side, some things make more sense to do on the US side. And where we do compete, we should go and promote together, and then let the business decide. But it makes our region a lot stronger. We need to focus on our talent. Very important to focus on our talent if we want to provide better jobs, because everybody wants the companies to bring more sophisticated jobs, but it comes together with the availability of the talent. So I think we need to keep working together. We need to do more promotion trips together, the city of El Paso, Santa Teresa, Las Cruces, and Juarez. We see it even as a corridor that goes all the way to Chihuahua, to the state capital. And we integrated a new organization called Chihuahua EDC, Chihuahua Economic Development Corp. That is precisely, the objective is to go to the world and promote as a region from Chihuahua to El Paso. And we have, it is business community-led, the private sector-led. We put it together at the end of last year, where we will participate as state governments, as city governments. We've had conversations with the city of El Paso, city of Juarez, Chihuahua, and they are all very positive in doing this together.
Thank you, Secretary de la Vega. Any final thoughts, Rick, and Mr. Francis, Mr. Grajeda, on this issue of collaboration?
I would tell you, I think Secretary de la Vega just characterized what has taken place and what can take place, and thank you. That said it all from my perspective.
Thank you. Marco, any final thoughts?
I would agree. We have great collaboration already that exists. Certainly, this this pandemic is giving us an opportunity to be more innovative, come up with new ideas to work as a region, work together. To maybe how to promote our region together, highlighting the things that we have. The bilingual nature of our region. The workforce, the opportunities, improve our education as a region. So I certainly think that this this pandemic gives us an opportunity to do something innovative using maybe these platforms that are available, that we're realizing now are available to bring us together. Certainly, I would like to see that as the New Mexico Border Authority. I think that would definitely help out our border region, and we'd be inclined to support that.
Right. Well, it's 12:01 p.m. And we would like to end on time. So first of all, thank you to the three of you, Secretary de la Vega, Mr. Francis, Mr. Grajeda, for joining us in this conversation with your very rich and diverse perspectives on this challenge and opportunity we're facing. And thank you to all the attendees who joined this webinar on behalf of the organizations that are hosting this. And look in your email for the links to the video, and also for the announcement of the next regional community conversation that is scheduled for next week. You will be getting an email by Friday. So thank you again, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. And thanks again.
Thank you all.
Right.
Gracias, Carlos. Thank you.
Gracias. Gracias a todos.
Hasta luego.
Adiós.
Adios.